So maybe I'll go back to you, Hussein, before I go back to Victoria and Angie. Curious as to, so when you talk about that intersection and what you learned at the CGA, can you give us some, and you talked about Yemen, can you give us some other specific examples in terms of how you apply the peace building lens and the content knowledge that you learned, at the CGA, but also in many of your other experiences, your professional experiences, and how it really sort of fits into your day-to-day work?
Definitely. So for us, our project is enhancing the social coexistence in Yemen through economic action. And that in itself tells you how much of the peace building is embedded in the project itself, although it's economy. But what we do is we bring in the civil society actors, we bring in the representative from both authorities, whether it's internationally recognized Yemeni government or the de facto authority, which is Ansarullah or Houthis. We look for connectors and dividers. We also look for the conflict sensitivity, gender equality, and how to break some of the negative social norms when it comes to gender inclusion, when it comes to minorities, and when it comes to al-muhammashin. Al-muhammashin literally translates into the neglected people. Those are the people even without the national ID. We come in, we talk to these actors through the seed plan, which is social coexistence and economic development plan. In that, we have drafted the first draft, and then we discuss it with the local Yemeni partners, with all the different actors. And this is where it comes to difficult conversation that Professor Hill was telling us about in the class. So it is really difficult. So it's multiple levels with the government, civil society, local communities, but also the partners that work with you. It's also important to apply the same peace building lenses to the partners, even they are international NGOs. You might think, oh, they don't need any training in Yemen, for example. They have been in Yemen for 10 years, but they have been in Yemen for 10 years doing the same thing and doing it in the wrong way. Now it's very difficult to change them as well as to change the Yemeni themselves. So in basically what we do is peace building provides us with the frame that we then need to talk to our local Yemeni partners and as equitable partners to build in that frame that we have to make it as beautiful as we can, to make it doable, not what ideally works, but what is actually doable in this specific context. And that brings me to the conflict sensitivity, which is, I would think the conflict sensitivity is the core part of the peace building. You have to be sensitive to everything that surrounds in that context and surrounding that context.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that rich description and explanation. Really do appreciate it. So I'm going to go back to Angie. So Angie, Human Rights Watch, as you pointed out in your introduction, is, it's an organization that I think many students and many in the CGA community know. And when you think about human rights Watch is one of the first that really comes to mind. So when you, in the context of your work, right, given the magnitude, right, of, the human rights violations that are happening around the world, like, how is it that you sort of determine, or your teams determine where funding, for example, is going to go, or how you're going to support programming that Human Rights Watch does in various parts of the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. And I was smiling to myself hearing, I think, children in Hussein's background. One of my colleagues lovingly called that the COVID symphony, which I think is such a great description. So I really think that I have the best of all worlds in my role. Because I'm constantly learning about new issues, new human rights issues, how things are rooted in international human rights law. that I maybe didn't know before. So it's very similar to actually how I felt at CGA, just really being rooted in the work. So I'm not, of course, an expert on any particular issue or area, as many of my colleagues at Human Rights Watch are, as my programmatic and advocacy colleagues are, but rather it's my job to work with our supporters to understand what their areas of interest are. And how they want to make a difference and support the work. So Human Rights Watch, as I mentioned, works in every corner of the world on myriad thematic issues from LGBT rights, women's rights, children's rights, business and human rights, and beyond. So what I love about my job, one of the things I love about my job is that I get to become a mini expert in each of these areas when a donor expresses particular interest in it. So I get to read about it. I get to learn how to speak about it. I get to foster relationships between the donors and my colleagues. Occasionally I get to travel with my programmatic colleagues and donors to places when we could do that. I went to Kenya a couple of years ago for the launch of a report on sexual violence against women in the aftermath of the election several years ago. So it's fun, it's fulfilling, it's never dull. It's working with characters on either side, both donors and colleagues. And so I'm not the one going into hotspots or crossing a border in Syria to take testimony, but I get to work every day to support the work and hopefully do a little bit to make it possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So that's a good segue then over to you, Victoria. You're working in a very specific area, right? Children and armed conflict. So would love to know more about what that looks like on a day-to-day, and kind of going back to also, Angie's point, like, how do you talk to donors, right, to support this work, right? Because this is a very, very specific area.
Sure, thanks for that. Yeah, so a lot of Watchlist work and our advocacy work, it revolves around the UN Security Council, which is definitely an interesting body to work with. So pulling back to kind of the foundation that CGA can give, that's been really helpful for me. Learning about the UN's framework, how it deals with member states and different powers that go on in the Security Council, and also the UN specialization, that Professor Sidhu has at CGA was really helpful in this regard as well. So because we work with the Security Council and its working group on children in armed conflict, it's an interesting conversation pushing our advocacy points and as well as getting support from member states. Obviously, we have to be sensitive to different topics, different issues, and at capital level, what the donor's interest is at heart. However, we have quite a few member states that are, we call them CAC champions, children in armed conflict champions, that are pretty consistent in their support for Watchlist mandate and the work. So what we really try to do amongst all council members is take the children in armed conflict agenda that they have and mainstream it into different areas. So right now, a big piece that Watchlist works on is the impact of counterterrorism measures and mechanisms on children in armed conflict, and how that is, we've seen it erode children's rights in different country situations, different conflict contexts. And that's been a big part of our advocacy push, as well as repatriation of child nationals, all sensitive topics for a lot of governments. But we've seen there is space to talk about it, and there is space to have these conversations with donors, which has been really good. However, it's very much catered within the UN language, which is another piece that I believe CGA really prepares students to enter that world, that field, because I think anyone who has spent time in the UN can attest to it's got its own language and its own way of functioning. So my time at CGA really prepared me to kind of step into that arena. We also, Watchlist just released its credible list report, which we do annually. And it looks at the Secretary General's list of perpetrators of grave violations against children in armed conflict. And so we provide our recommendations after extensive analysis and research, and recommend parties that maybe are not listed that should be, where the gaps are, if there are discrepancies within the report, and also situations of concern that we believe should be added. So right now we're really looking at violations against children in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, as well as Tigray, the Tigray region in Ethiopia is a big concern for us. So looking at the 6th grade violations in different country contexts, and then taking that information from our partners on the ground, putting it into reports, putting it into documents that our donors can process, that member states can process, and hopefully bring into policy.
Fantastic. I'm going to stay with you because you just sort of touched upon the next question that I want to ask, that I know that probably all of our audience, they're really interested. You know, many people attending today are students, or, you know, potentially people who are interested in coming to the CGA, or people who are looking to pivot, transition in their careers. So what does your organization, or organizations that are similar to yours, what do they look for? What are the skills that someone needs in order to get a position to be successful in the type of work that you're doing?
Sure. So I think for Watchlist specifically, we definitely look for candidates who are detail oriented and also possess solid writing skills and come prepared. Because I think in our work, sometimes working with a body such as the Security Council, and as well as liaising with governments, we need to be prepared and very specific. And I think when dealing with human rights and international law in general as a whole, that specificity is important. And so that is a big thing for Watchlist. I think also what I've learned in the process of applying for jobs before Watchlist and doing interviews and things like that, just to encourage students who are stepping into that new chapter, I think it's important to know that you don't know everything, and it's okay. We don't expect, I know Watchlist doesn't expect experts immediately. However, I think for us, for example, there needs to be a basis of understanding of human rights and international law, as well as the children and armed conflict agenda. There needs to be interest and previous experience, of course. However, I think an openness to learn and conveying that openness to learn is important for someone especially when we're looking to hire interns as well. And I know for some prospective students who are stepping into that realm and going to be looking for internships, that's very important in an internship with us, is that you're open to kind of learning what you don't know, and as well as balancing that with bringing something to the table.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. So Angie, it's kind of the same question, right? And I know, I'm sure when Dr. Trahan joins us, and Human Rights Watch is an organization that many students are really interested in getting involved in. So what do you recommend, right? What are some skills that are, maybe specific to HRW, or just that you have found to be important to you or important to members of your team?
Yeah, definitely. And I think on the internship piece, Human Rights Watch is now paying all of our interns, which is a long time coming and the right thing to do. So if you're looking for internships, know that you will be paid for your work, for your labor. So that is a good thing. I think in hiring at Human Rights Watch, all the regular things, exactly what Victoria said, of course, and I'm speaking from a fundraising perspective, being a good writer, being able to speak about the work, being passionate about the work. Of course, if you're interviewing with us, demonstrate that you know what Human Rights Watch is and the work that we do, and your excitement about it. But I think one thing I will plug is, in terms of fundraising, think about fundraising. I know it's not the sexiest or the most exciting in people's minds, when you're in grad school and you're ready to kind of take the next step in your career, but don't shoot it down. It's a really great foot in the door in a really competitive field. And I was working in this field before I came to CGA, and CGA, my experience at CGA made me much more effective. And I really believe that in fundraising and in learning human rights more intimately. But we really need to, I mean, every organization needs to do this, every NGO. We need to create more diverse and inclusive cultures. So if people are thinking of applying, but think maybe they don't have enough of the right experience or the right background, you know, I really, when I'm looking to hire people, I'm not looking for fundraising background. I'm not looking for what school you went to or, you know, kind of what any sort of pedigree is. I just want people who really want to be a part of Human Rights Watch, who are excited to speak about it and learn, and can learn on the job and demonstrate that they can learn on the job. And I think we'll all be better and more effective if we start to bring diverse and different groups that don't maybe come from the same background, which is so important about paying interns. It's all part of that. So think about it. Think about fundraising when you're thinking about your career. And I'm always happy to have chats with people or answer questions about that in more detail.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. I imagine you're going to there's going to be more than a few people who are going to want to reach out and to get more information from you. So appreciate you being generous with sharing your contact information. Hussein, over to you. What are some, you know, maybe skills that are different or things that maybe that Angie or Victoria hasn't already said, or that you want to just reinforce with regards to the types of skills that are really important for the type of work that you're doing?
Definitely. But before answering that, let me share a little bit of my personal experience. When I started the peace building concentration, I was scared. I couldn't find a job for peace builder. I was looking online. I was like, Professor, I can't find any job for me. Even when we invited some speakers from UN, I was like, everybody talks about peace building. I don't see any job for peace builders. Like there is no title like that. But now, after 2-3 years after graduation, now I'm honestly at a position where I now, at the moment, I have 3 offers for all the 3 offers are for peace building somehow, whether it's social work, whether it's partnership building and things like that. All of them are in Middle East. So it is really, peace building is growing and there are more needs in the field. You can't feel it in New York maybe, or when you're at school. Once you come to the field, you realize how much the peace building people are needed actually in the field, no matter what the organization does. So with that, I've realized that M&E has grown, has increasingly become one of the most important kind of like role for all of the organizations working, whether it's in conflict or even non-conflict countries. With that, the writing, like all organizations, when they launch a program or a project, they need someone to do at least, whether it's IPCA, in the integrated peace and conflict analysis, or some sort of skimming the environment, the context of what is currently existing, what is needed, what's the gap, how we add our value to this context. So the research is also a very, very important part of what we do. Third is to really be like Victoria said, how much can you open yourself? How much can you make yourself, like show yourself, okay, I'm here, I don't know everything, but I'm really willing to learn whatever it takes. So those are really the skills that is really needed. And that's what we're looking for, honestly. Like in terms of M&E, we're looking for people in M&E. Not only us, other NGOs in the Middle East, they're looking for M&E. They're looking for researchers. There is new wave of the organizations who come to Yemen, to Libya, to Iraq and Syria. And the first thing they want to do is to study the context and the environment. So the researcher is really needed. You have to be a good writer. If you're struggling with your thesis, then you should practice more writing. And one time I told Professor Hill, I was like, you're too tough when you grade. He was like, well, I'm preparing you for the field. It is tough. It's not easy to write. So you need to really work hard and get that from the beginning. And actually, I thank Professor Hill for being tough. Now I realize he wasn't tough enough.
Professor Hill, do you hear that? You're going to have to be a little tougher, okay?
I imagine there are students listening to you, Hussein, right now, or wishing you would stop talking.
Well, I'm gonna take this a little bit before we move on to my next question, though, Hussein, and everyone, both Angie, Victoria, you've all been very generous with referencing the CGA as being kind of an important part of your trajectory and how you're in your current positions. But Hussein, you just referenced writing and the emphasis on writing. Was there a specific class or experience that you had while at the CGA that you feel was kind of maybe a linchpin moment or linchpin experience for what you're doing?
Well, I would say I would reference one of my meeting with Professor Hill, and my first thesis when I submitted it, and I didn't get the enough grade that I was expecting, and I met Professor Hill. I was like, "What's going on? Why?" And he literally said, "I'm disappointed in your writing." So that was really a very tough push for me to realize, okay, I'm here at CGI and I'm a master level, and here is where they prepare me for what's come, like what the bigger thing in the field. And even though I was in the field before, prior to joining the CGA, but I seriously was not thinking that it's that serious. The field is that serious when you actually get a role. And a lot of stuff, like for Yemen project, for example, all of the funds, all of the efforts depend on the analysis that I and one of my for the entire project. So that's a lot of responsibility. And from like Professor Hill really pushed me to do better. And happily, he was very happy with my thesis. And that was kind of like made me proud. So ever since, I've been continuously trying to write better and better because I now know the responsibility of it. People look at my research and actually design program based in that paper. So it is a lot of responsibility to bear.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Angie, what about you? I mean, it's been, it's been 9 years, but when you look back, what was there, again, a course or an experience or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was such a great experience. But so going back to school was like manna from the heavens for me. It was a lot of hard work. But this program basically took everything that I was already interested in and reading about and helped me just really dig deeper into it. So I had so many great classes. I was particularly interested in, wrote my thesis around international justice. So my classes with Professor Trahan were just really informative and fun, and I learned so much. We went to Bosnia, Serbia, The Hague together. I went on the Cuba field intensive, which was amazing. But in terms of specifics, I can give you one specific class, which was International Human Rights Law with Professor Belinda Cooper. And she had a project where she would give us a topic every week, torture, free speech, something light like that we were talking about. And every week we would have to write a 1 to 2 page paper on one side of the argument of whatever issue. And then we would come to class, we'd turn it in, and then we'd have to debate with someone who had written the opposite side of that paper, but we'd have to debate the opposite side that we had written about. And I just loved that. I thought it was so great. I learned so much. It was great prep for really learning how to think on your feet, to deep dive into making a case and backing it up. It's intimidating to stand up and argue against something, if you don't really believe what you're arguing, but if you had taken the other side. But it was just such a great learning experience. And 8 or 9 years later, I still think about that and try to approach when I'm trying to persuade a supporter or having a conversation with a colleague. I think about it in those terms. So it was great.
Love that. Thank you. That's a great assignment. So I'm probably gonna borrow it from Belinda.
Such a good assignment.
It's excellent. It's great. Victoria, so you're our most recent graduate, so you don't have to go too far down your memory lane. But what any again classes, experiences that you'd like to share or that you feel were kind of pivotal for helping you to find your way to where you are now?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like because I've it's just the looking over my shoulder back. I have so many things that come to mind, but definitely Professor Trahan was monumental for me in my career development, my academic development, my writing, which really is coming in handy as we speak. So I felt like it was very full circle because I started at CGA and with the international law course that we all have to take. But I really enjoyed it. And Professor Trahan walked me through the legal frameworks from A to Z, which were tough. I think all students can attest that it's tough to kind of navigate that. And then she was my phenomenal senior thesis advisor and really helped me then bring where we started at the end, where I wrote about how the international community is diverging from its norms and standards of how it treats child soldiers or children allegedly associated with armed forces and armed groups due to counterterrorism measures. And it's a deep topic, and she really helped me break it down every step of the way. So that was huge for me. And Professor Cooper, I also did the debates, which continues to impact my life today. I always think about them, especially when trying to understand some member state positions that we get and just trying to think about, okay, well, this is my gut reaction and this is our advocacy points. However, where may this actor be coming from? Where is the stakeholder coming from in this? And how can we push our advocacy through that lens? So that was really helpful. I also want to say that the global field intensives, I know with students in the pandemic right now, it's really tough, and I really hope they do come back. I went to Rwanda with Professor Trahan and Katie, who's also on the call, I think, and Professor Cooper. It was an amazing experience. And one of the things that it still impacts me in my work today is seeing what can happen, the consequences that happen when the international community fails to act and member states do not uphold their obligations. We do not uphold international humanitarian law and international law, and what can be the result. And when we say never again, you know, how do we actually put that into action? And so that was a huge course for me. And I'll finish off, I know we're low on time, but just Professor Sidhu's UN course that I took was instrumental. I took it alongside my thesis and my last semester at CGA, and we ended up going virtual halfway through. Yet Professor Sidhu every single week brought in someone who works within the UN system, and we were able to talk with them and kind of bring the real world into our classroom and vice versa. And even when we went virtual, he still stuck to that. And it allowed me to network. It continued throughout my thesis. I was able to meet people in that course that helped me with my thesis work. So those are just some highlights, but yeah, CGA is fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you. These are all wonderful highlights. Thank you all for that. And actually, Professor Trahan, in the magic that she is able to create, was able to take her Bosnia and Rwanda GFI and kind of combine it and did it virtually in January. So she did a virtual GFI, which was extraordinarily successful. The student evaluations were really, illustrated how effective it was. And I am also happy to say that it looks like we're getting the green light. So starting in January of 22, we will be back in action hosting GFIs. So fingers crossed, but the university seems to be giving us the go ahead. So we have that to look forward to. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. And these are some, what I call my rapid fire line of questions. So I'm going to start with you, Hussein. Best or worst piece of career advice? Hussein, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I still haven't learned the online.
No, none of us can. It's part of like the COVID symphony. It's the idea that, excuse me, unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. The worst advice, before I traveled to Yemen, I met some of my friends who had been in Yemen for a very long time. And I said, okay, I'm going to Yemen and Jordan. What is your advice? He was like, don't help everyone. I know you, Hussein, don't help everyone. The best one it was my boss. I was like, Professor, I'm here now. What's your advice? He said, meet everyone and listen to everyone.
That's great. Two polar opposites, right? You went with the last one, right? The latter. Angie, what about you? Best or worst career advice, or both?
So best is very practical. It was right when I started at Human Rights Watch, and one of our closest donors said, always take some time when you come into the office in the mornings, take 20 minutes to get personal stuff, check personal stuff off your list, make doctor's appointments, kids stuff, whatever you need to do and then you can focus on your day. And I have really taken that to heart. It was a great piece of advice. And I don't think I've ever really gotten horrible career advice that I can recall.
That's great. Well, I love that. That's great advice, though, in terms of about taking those 20 minutes. And by the way, I hope you don't mind, Angie, but I'm also going to share that Angie is a mom of 3. So she's, juggling a very full-time position at Human Rights Watch and being a super mom to 3 children. So it's great. Victoria?
Yeah, I'd say probably my worst advice, and it didn't come from an individual. I think it's just this idea that there's only one linear path to follow in this arena, and that you have to stick to that one, and that only certain positions of power can make a global impact. I think that is wrong. The best piece of advice is that your presence is powerful. And I think it speaks to some of what Hussein was just saying, that hearing people, listening to people, it really can impact your entire career. So.
Excellent. So I'm going to stay with you, Victoria. Book, podcast, website that you recommend?
Okay, yeah, I thought about this, and I know there's tons of academic things and such, but one of the things I've been listening to on breaks in my workday, because sometimes the reports, that come through my desk and through my computer are not, they're grim. They're not the most fun to look at. And so one of the podcasts I've been listening to on breaks is Oprah's Super Soul Sunday podcast. And it's just got a lot of nice, calming, just things to ponder. So I like doing that in my break, and I suggest that one.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Angie, what about you? Book, podcast, website, something you want to recommend?
So it's hard because I'm a total reading snob, and I get very competitive with myself in terms of how much I can read and what I can read. But I think the best book that I read in 2020 was probably Shuggie Bain. It's so good, but also Homeland Elegies, excellent.
Excellent, great. Hussein?
I use a lot of CGA Collaborative. They have a lot of good tools for peace building and conflict resolution. And I also would keep, if you leave the US and live in the Middle East, I would keep the Peace Land in my bag all the time.
That's excellent. Thank you. Is there, and now the kind of a quick question for all of you, is there a skill that you're currently developing, something that, maybe you didn't get in graduate school that you are seeking to develop now? Hussein?
I took the state, and the only thing that is missing now, actually get to practicing it, to doing it. I was more on the project management side, the research writing, and less on the data analysis and data visualization. And I'm working, and I've planned with my boss to work on that.
Excellent. Victoria?
Well, for me, I think in my immediate career goals to strengthen is writing government grants. I think there's definitely a different style to that. So it's been a wonderful learning experience working on that. But I think just in general is continuing to strengthen skills on how to navigate this global arena. And I think it has very particular steps here and there, but I think to each their own, and another on the other hand. So just trying to find my own path within that space.
Excellent. Angie?
I'm trying to learn to be a better manager and a better leader.
Okay, thank you. Final question, very quick. I asked Angie, Hussein, and Victoria if they could have their own personal billboard. They would reach hundreds of thousands of people, and they wanted to have a message about human rights and/or peace building. What would be on it? So, Angie, I'm going to start with you.
I would say facts still matter. They have to, and never stop fighting for justice.
Excellent, love it. Hussein?
I would say, and that's a big message, honestly. And I thought about it. I was like, what I'm gonna say. But the biggest thing I could say is to awaken the consciousness, whether it's political consciousness, whether it's a consciousness of responsibilities. As a member of any society and community, you have a role. Please play your role.
Oh, I love it. It's beautiful. Thank you. Victoria?
Mine almost actually piggybacks on Hussein's, and it's that sustainable peace requires collective responsibility.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. I really am so grateful to the three of you for joining us. Everything that you shared, your insights, your advice, your suggestions. I know that they have been, deeply appreciated by our audience. I know I have so enjoyed learning from all of you, and it's just wonderful also to reconnect. Please do stay with us. I'm going to pass it over now to Dr. Trahan and Dr. Hill, who are going to talk to us about their respective concentrations, the international law and human rights concentration and the peace building concentration. So everyone in the audience, you can do a kind of a virtual clap for Angie, Victoria, and Hussein, and really wonderful to see you all again. But again, stay on. You're going to kind of see in terms of where the concentrations are going. So over to you, Jen, and to Tom.
I guess that was my cue to go first.
Go right ahead.
And I apologize, my voice is a little bit croaky. It's great. I'm so happy to be on this Zoom with, actually, I've taught all three of our panelists, so it's super to see them. And I actually really can't wait till I see you guys all in person. I think it came out, I had the great pleasure of traveling with Angie on one of the global field intensives to The Hague, Bosnia, and Serbia. And Victoria and I got to go to Rwanda together, and that was super fun. I'm actually also, I used to work at Human Rights Watch as well in the International Justice Program. So I had the concentration, and it kind of consists of a basket of courses in the human rights field and a basket of courses in the international law field. Of course, human rights are part of international law, so it's kind of all one and the same. So in human rights, it's the basic human rights course. Then we have a focus on gender and human rights. We have human rights research and advocacy, and that's taught by Amnesty International's UN advocate. We will have a whole course in the fall, I think, human rights, environment, and climate change. We have a course focusing on refugees and statelessness. I teach the core international law course. I know that sounds dry. I think it's really not. It's a little bit of laws of war, a little bit of atrocity crimes. If anyone listening wonders why more isn't being done to help the Uyghurs or the Rohingya, I mean, these are topics we discuss. So it's very much not human rights and international law just in the textbook, but as applied in the field. So I think we're always, looking in the, considering the geopolitical context in which all of this is, of course, occurring. I teach courses on international criminal tribunals, transitional justice, which is how does the country get over mass atrocity crimes, and I have a course focused kind of in the aftermath of 9/11. It's called U.S. Use of Force in the Global War on Terror. I use air quotes. I'm not sure I buy into this global war framework, so I somewhat challenge it. And then I lead the field intensives to Hague, Bosnia, Serbia, and to Rwanda. And of course, CGA has a variety of field intensives in non-COVID years, and I'm really looking forward to them springing back. I think there's a lot of overlap in our concentrations, whether Professor Hill is taking students to Colombia or I'm taking them to Bosnia. In Bosnia, we're focusing on rebuilding and reconciliation, which to me is also kind of part of peace building. So there's certainly a lot of overlap. Where do students go out of the Human Rights International Law concentration? Well, you just got two great examples. I will add that a few students every year say, I really want to be a lawyer, and then we talk about law school. I have a student now finishing up her PhD. She went with me to Rwanda, and after that, her PhD is on the role of the Interahamwe during the genocide in Rwanda. Most probably from this concentration, international law and human rights, probably want to work for NGOs. So I have had students go to Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Human Rights First, but I always tell students to also, don't ignore the smaller ones that, maybe until today you didn't know of Watchlist and Children in Armed Conflict. I have an alumni at International Center for Transitional Justice. One went to Coalition for the International Criminal Court. I have one who's working at the International Criminal Court. And some out of this concentration also kind of go into US government jobs. I have a couple of alumni in the State Department, think tanks in Washington. Sometimes it's maybe less usual from this concentration, but going into kind of counterterrorism and FBI, is also possible. I have another student who works in corporate social responsibility. I have a couple who are at UNICEF. So it's a broad variety. And I love the advice, don't just think one channel. And I do think you have to think broadly and creatively. So I think that concentration well prepares students for this. I think what the Center for Global Affairs really does well is, I think it's a unique blend of academic knowledge that as applied in the real world. So we're very much not an ivory tower think tank. And I think that would be what distinguishes us from our competitors. The Center for Global Affairs offers a variety of practicums where you get to do work for a client. I'm hoping to set one up potentially for the fall in the human rights area where we will, do this kind of work. I've had students who went on the field intensives with me and then got internships in Sarajevo and in The Hague. So just springboarding off of the field intensive that we did together. So I think that kind of sums up the Center for Global Affairs in a nutshell, that it is really the academic knowledge, the rigorous writing requirements that have been stressed, and I love Hussein emphasizing those, absolutely. But yet as applied, with a foot in the door, being in New York is a great place to be to get a graduate degree because there's so many places you could intern in, parts of the UN, missions to the UN, NGOs who are doing advocacy to the UN. So I think being in New York City provides a lot of internship opportunities. And I'm always encouraging students as well to seize those and to make real world connections because they really do matter. So, for anyone interested in Center for Global Affairs, obviously, I think it's a terrific institution. I've taught here now full-time for 12 years. And of course, I'm partial to my concentration, but the center has many really interesting concentrations. And I'm just so pleased that Victoria and Angie and Hussein could be here and share all their lovely words and terrific advice. And I couldn't be more proud of all three of them. So thanks. I'll end there. Pass to Tom.
Thank you, Jen. Well, I would echo so many of the things that you said, but I know our time is short, so I won't repeat. What I would say is, from the perspective of the peacebuilding concentration, we've always tried to make sure that it's a very deeply skills-based concentration. Now, of course, everything has to be grounded in theory, but the specific courses that we offer and continue to develop are in response to the kinds of skill sets that that I understand from my practitioner colleagues, or my full-time practitioner colleagues at least, that are needed in those organizations. So, for example, the sort of the linchpin of the concentration has always been the workshop in applied peacebuilding, and that's the opportunity that students have. Hussein was a participant in it when he was in the program, but it's when students have an opportunity to get linked with professional peacebuilding organizations, develop a relationship with them during the 14-week semester, and then design a project that they then carry out over the summer. Now, obviously, this has been a little bit of a challenge this last year throughout the pandemic, but really students have been remarkably, I think, resourceful in figuring out how to work remotely and develop those relationships with organizations as they have in other domains as well. but so that's any advice I would give to anybody who's coming and wants to do the concentration. It's not a required course, but I would say that students really miss out on that opportunity to prepare themselves for careers and field work without taking it. But there are of course other courses, and Hussein pointed to this a little bit when he kept mentioning his research and his sort of the need of organizations to do conflict assessment work. That our conflict assessment course, I think, is actually really critical for students in order to prepare them for careers with a lot of different organizations, not only those that are explicitly in peace building, but in other related domains as well, particularly development, humanitarian assistance, because every organization has learned that they really need to do deep context research before they intervene effectively in those contexts. So I would really point it out, but also the mediation course, and we continue to evolve. I mean, we're very close now to adding a new course for the fall. I guess I can say, Carolyn, that we'll have a new course in restorative justice that will be connected, as Jennifer was saying. There are these linkages between our concentrations, and so we already have a great course in transitional justice, and you do a lot of work in that area. But this will look specifically at the area of sort of the indigenous roots of restorative justice and how that's playing out in different contexts, including the the U.S. context, the fight for racial justice here, and how that is both connected historically, globally, but also is reaching out in contemporary ways. So where do our students go to work? I mean, I think Hussein gave you a good example there, but I was just thinking, and this is both related to sort of the practical part of this, as well as to the how students find these opportunities. We have 4 alums that I'm currently aware of who are working in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, Hussein being one of them. And I was just thinking about the different positions they have. You heard what Hussein has been doing, but we have a student who's a country director there for Search for Common Ground, which is the largest peacebuilding NGO in the world. We have a student who's working with the International Rescue Committee. We have another student who's working with a locally based foundation NGO that's working in a variety of peacebuilding areas called the Seed Foundation. And so, a lot of our students end up working for those types of organizations. Like Jennifer mentioned, I have a few students who've gone on working either currently or past work toward PhDs, certainly doing government work. A few who've gone into the private sector, realizing that these skills like mediation, dialogue facilitation, project management, et cetera, that are dealt with in the concentration are also needed in that area. And the last thing I'll leave you with, I'm going to drop something in the chat for all of you. It's an interesting way of thinking about careers in peace building and how they're connected to development in other fields. This is from a blogger through Peace Insight in Colombia.
Tom, you're muted.
Okay, I don't know how that happened. But anyway, this is from a Colombian activist that I just dropped in the chat about sort of peace building and the specific skills that we saw during the pandemic, in particular, that are crucial now in terms of the post-COVID world. And I think hopefully Hussein's experience of having multiple suitors now is one that is going to become, I think fairly standard for students coming out of the concentration with the types of skills that they're carrying out into the world. So I'll stop because I know we're running out of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Hill. Thank you, Professor Trahan. Again, sincere thanks to Victoria, to Hussein and Angie for being with us today, for, again, all the fantastic insights that you shared. For anyone that is interested in learning more and wants to, I just had it up and now I lost it. But please do feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you about the program. We're happy to talk to you about all the different things that are happening at the CGA. We remain very, very active. We're still hosting a lot of events. We're doing them of course, virtually, but really grateful to all of you for taking the time today to be with us. And we look forward to having you join us for more future events. I think our next career event will be looking at positions in the global economy and energy, and we'll send out details about that in the next week or so. So again, thank you all so much. Wishing you all a great, great, great weekend, and take care. Okay, everyone, stay safe, be well. Thank you. Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.